So I actually went to college for hospitality management in Las Vegas, in undergrad and graduate. And right out of college, I joined the Las Vegas Hilton, and Expedia was actually my client. And about about a year working with them, they ended up offering me what I considered at the time, and still consider at the time, my ideal job. It was basically managing the Las Vegas hospitality market. So I went from working in one hotel to, when I started at Expedia, I worked with all of the hotels in the market. So it was really neat for me because I got the perspective of, the large hotels, the small hotels, the independent hotels, the branded hotels. So it was really a great experience, and never thought I would be at a company for over 2 decades, but I was with Expedia for 21 years. And my journey after the first role that I had, managing the Las Vegas market and all of the gaming markets, then I moved into strategic accounts and managed all of our large chains. Started in North America, then eventually globally. So managed all of our chain relationships and then all of the regional accounts. And I was very curious about technology. So I created our connectivity team and started that division. And really my career throughout Expedia was based on curiosity. And I looked at opportunities where there was both a business need and an opportunity for me to grow personally and professionally. So I worked with the large chains and connectivity for years. And then I found that there was an opportunity for marketing. And I was overseeing the B2B marketing team, and we started very, very small with literally a handful of people. And when I left, we were a couple of hundred people, and really took the marketing function and the industry engagement function very seriously, and really grew that and scaled that business. And then another area that I found a need was in diversity and inclusion. And when I was in the lodging division, I focused on building up the diversity discipline, and then eventually grew that through Expedia and became Expedia's first chief inclusion officer, which was fascinating and really focused on our partners, our employees, the community, and really making sure that we thought about the business in a diverse way, in a very inclusive way. So that was quite an interesting time for me at Expedia.
I'd love
And
to talk a little bit more about that if we could, but I'm very curious about maybe initial impressions, but also what you saw about the travel and hospitality industry at large. You eventually became CMO at Expedia. And I think some of our listeners either do work or are interested in working at Expedia or a company like Expedia. Some work at hotels, some are in completely different businesses. But I always want our listeners to understand the scope and the level of opportunity that exists within travel and hospitality. I'm curious from your perspective what you've noticed during your time at Expedia. Could you speak a little bit to that opportunity that you saw and the size of it?
absolutely, I think there are tons of opportunities. The reason that I stayed at Expedia so long, of course, the people and the roles, but it really was for the opportunities. It was, a global company, so people could very easily transfer into different super regions. We had multiple brands, so there was an opportunity to learn the B2B and the B2C side. There's the opportunity to, work with partners and understand, not working in hotels, but working with hotels and understand the opportunities there. So I think there's endless opportunities in large and small companies, but I think travel is such a great space, and it's something that you know everyone wants to be in and everyone wants to do is be in the travel business.
There's a lot of advantages, and I think there's a lot of whether almost everybody loves traveling personally, or you look at some of the tailwinds behind the industry, it becomes interesting. But I think realistically, there's a lot of other interesting industries as well. And I guess what would you say to someone who's maybe on the fence or maybe works in hospitality and is thinking of moving outside the industry? on a very high level, what are some of what's the kind of business case or career case for working in hospitality and travel?
I think the business case is the people. It is the people and really helping people travel and have fun. I remember once I said to the old professor at UNLV that we're not saving lives. And he stopped me dead in my tracks and said, Melissa, we are actually saving lives in travel. And I never forget that. And he said, people have, when they work in travel, they can travel. When they're helping people travel, they're having fun. And it was just kind of an interesting thing that he said to me. And I'll quote another person, Barry Diller, who is chairman of Expedia and a brilliant man. He said, "Where there's life, there's travel," and that's really it. There's so many opportunities in travel, and I think both of those gentlemen quoted it very nicely.
Yeah, it's interesting to see because it seems resilient, and it seems there's some, underlying shifts in how people value things, and how they want to use their money away from things to more experiences. So it's interesting to see that it's kind of it feels like that transcends any cyclical nature of we want to get out after the pandemic. I think this is a bigger trend, and then you have more people entering the middle class. You have kind of all this, rise in global wealth. So you have this becomes really interesting. I think one thing that also stands out to me is this notion of, Expedia is a technology company, but it's been around for decades and it continues to grow. And um, what would you say for people maybe earlier in their careers who are thinking about where to work? I think, about, picking a trend because it feels like online distribution and people buying travel accelerating and maybe put some tailwinds behind what you were doing. Is that fair to say?
It's definitely fair to say. I started just before 9/11, and that was really a pivotal moment for technology and travel. And to your question, for people that are just thinking about careers, there's so much happening in technology that, to me, that is a really interesting uh, angle to focus on. And if technology is not your thing and there's something else that your thing that makes you light up, then that's really what you should go after. And one of the things that I did when I was first getting out of college is talk to a lot of people. And I think building a network and talking to people in different areas of hospitality and different professional areas outside of hospitality is really important, and it helped make my decision to go into hospitality.
What's a smart way to do that? Because I've seen it done well and I've seen it done not so well. How would you advise someone begin that process of starting to talk to people that might be able to help them?
I think they need to find out who they want to talk to. And once they figure that out, the tricky part is how to get to them. And my advice for people would be just reach out to them and ask them for a 15-minute conversation on career advice. The odds of someone saying no are really slim. And so I think asking, use your professors, use your if you've done an internship, use your connections. I think when people are younger, they're less willing to, or less excited about going out and asking for help. But there's been tons of studies out there that people want to give advice and want to help people. So I would say, reach out and make sure that you're making your connections and start building your network when you're younger.
I love it. I love it. Well, and I thank you for taking time to have this conversation because you're helping a lot of people, I think, by sharing, through this conversation, by amazing events. I know you attended Hertelier's great event in New York a little while back. And so I think that maybe is an opportunity for leaders as well to think about, are there opportunities to do this at scale? And I can help people learn and grow. Um, I I'm very interested, in your role, eventually becoming CMO at Expedia. You're in charge of growth, right? And so, for our listeners that maybe have something that they think is good for the world, something that matters, um, they probably want to get it out to more people. I'm curious, as you reflect back on your time leading marketing, leading growth for Expedia, were there some things that you did that you think had an outsized impact on the result in Expedia becoming the success story it is today, during your time there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. One of the things that made me successful in marketing was really focusing on scale and focusing on personalized messaging, but not over personalizing. And the other area that that I focused on was try to not have too many products that you're focusing on, and really, when you have those products that you're marketing, be very specific with your messaging and have easy messaging. But I know that scale is really, when you get into larger companies, scale is really critically important. And from a marketing standpoint, it's obviously very important.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. You were also uh, appointed Expedia Group's first chief inclusion officer. There's a great conversation you have with DEI advisors about that I'm going to link to in the show notes. I think in that conversation, you were talking a little bit about the opportunity and the importance of kind of uh, sort of getting top leadership supportive of an idea and initiative that you think is important. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that. Sometimes you'll talk about this concept of managing up. You're already, a top executive at the company, but from what you shared on that other conversation, it sounds like there was still some convincing or some sign off or support that was needed. How did you go about that?
There definitely was convincing, and there also were a lot of um, different thoughts and different concepts that people were thinking about it. One of the things that I've always done is get people in a room and talk and bring data and bring the personal touch. And when I was able to get all of our senior leaders in one room and tell them they can't have their laptops, we're not going to have a PowerPoint, which was very distraught for us to have no PowerPoint or no Excel, and really talk about the impact of diversity and inclusion and how it impacts us as leaders, as a company, our customers, our partners. And if you think about the buying decisions of how travel is being purchased, today, that right there shows. So it's really about real life examples, case studies, and really talking through what are the concerns, what's the hesitation. And then another thing that I did is make sure that once we moved forward with initiatives in the DEI space, is equip the leaders to be able to talk extremely comfortable about the topics. And that probably was the most successful, is really giving them proper one-on-one training so that they felt confident and that they felt authentic about talking about inclusion and diversity.
I think you may have already answered the question I had, which is what does having people together in a room do that you can't do virtually? Because global companies have had, distributed virtual meetings for a long time. A lot of more people experienced it post pandemic, but I think you already touched on this on a few points. But anything else come to mind in terms of what did that in person conversation and decision making do for this initiative?
It really, I remember very vividly, this is, such a unique topic. And that's why I wanted everyone's full attention and I wanted everyone in person, is I saw emotions. I actually saw two senior leaders that are men cry when we were talking through some of the topics. That would not have happened on Zoom. So that in-person connection and us being able to pull out of them what that emotional connection is. And ironically, those two gentlemen that were emotional in the meeting became the biggest advocates for the program. And it was really because we were in person and having those open discussions.
I love that. Is there anything else as you reflect back on your time at Expedia that is top of mind for you or you'd like to talk about?
One of the pieces of advice that I would give to students or individuals that are just entering the hospitality industry is take chances and take risks and move around within a company or to other companies so that you can get that wealth of experience. While I was at Expedia 21 years, I held multiple roles in almost like individual companies. But that is advice that I would give. And that's what I learned at Expedia is number one, asking for what you want and putting a business case around it. And don't be afraid. And then really explore all the opportunities and don't just be in your individual lane. Lift your head up and look around the company and around the world. There's so much growth that you can learn from doing that.
Okay, so that opened up. I have to ask you two follow-up questions. I know you've taken risks and you made a lot of moves before and after Expedia, but reflecting on your Expedia experience, to your point of taking risks, does one of the risks or the big bets that you made during your time there stand out to you? And if so, can you tell me a little bit about that? How did that feel?
You're gonna laugh at this one. When I was after I was managing the gaming markets, um, I was interviewing for a position for vice president. And it was one of those situations where I had been asked to interview, and the gentleman who was interviewing me asked why I wanted the role. And I said, well, I want to get out of my comfort zone. And so I moved from a role where I was managing Las Vegas market and gaming hotels. I knew all of them, great relationships, to managing our chain business. And I really didn't know the difference between a Hilton and a Marriott, and then took over that business. And so that was one of those moments where I pushed myself way out of my comfort zone. And it ended up being, one of the best moves that I made, and developed super strong relationships with partners around the world.
I love it. And then the other piece I want to follow up on is you talked about bringing a good business case with you in the context of building the inclusion program at Expedia. I'm sure as somebody leading a large organization, you've also seen a lot of business cases presented to you. My question is, what are the hallmarks of what creates a really strong business case versus one that's weak and is just not going to go anywhere?
Don't exaggerate. That is one thing that I've seen a lot of, and I work with a lot of startups, and that's the advice that I tell them is don't exaggerate the numbers, um, and or don't exaggerate the numbers, and don't overestimate the opportunity. And the other piece of advice would be do your homework, all of the things, know your business case inside and out, and know it so well that if the PowerPoint crashed, that you could talk very intelligently without looking at any notes. So know it really well and be prepared. And good, bad, or indifferent, the way that you present really makes a difference. So not only be super prepared and know all of the points of your business case, but be able to present it with confidence, with ease, be able to answer questions, push back when you need to appropriately. So I would say kind of all of those things are really kind of wrapped up into a good business case.
That's very helpful. I want to talk a little bit about thinking about transitions. You're CMO of one of the biggest travel and hospitality companies in the world, right? And then it becomes, what do you do for the next act, right? And you've made a lot of moves since then, but I want to go just spend a little moment talking about that process. How did you think about and evaluate how to make a change?
I love that question because I think a lot of people have that question at one point or another in their careers. And being with Expedia for over 20 years, I had been thinking for years about what is the next act. And then COVID hit. And like a lot of leaders in hospitality, I wanted to buckle down and put a lot of time and energy into my employees and the business and our partners, et cetera, and did multiple reorgs. And once I got our team to a really great spot and a really amazing leadership team, I said to my boss, I'm going to step back and I'm going to take a year off. And the reason I took a year off was to decompress, of course, but it was also to figure out what is the next act and really be very deliberate, intentional, and thoughtful about what's the next act and who do I want to work with in the next act. And throughout my year off, I did a couple of things. I didn't think I would be able to take the full year off, but I had some good supporters that were pushing me to not go back to work quickly. But what I did is once a week, I would reach out to someone I hadn't talked to in 6 months or a year. So I kept my network really, really relevant. And the other thing that I did is I learned something new every week. And it could be as small as a sea bass recipe or as large as a coaching certification. And so that really gave me the opportunity to re-engage with what I wanted to do and what excites me and what, doesn't excite me. And I think at the core of my time off and determining what I wanted to do, I wanted to work with the people that could help me grow and that I could help grow. And I wanted to work with companies that had the same type of values that I have. And that's really what I'm doing now is whether it's advisory roles that I have with Thayer Ventures, female founders in hospitality, or whether it's some of the clients that I have, I'm working with really smart people that want to make a difference and really want to see results. And I was just very deliberate about that.
I want to get into some of the things that you're working on now, but if I could ask a follow up to that, I was talking to Nina Cleveland, who's the founder of Female Founders in Hospitality. Before this, she's been a guest on the show, and she was saying, there's a movement during the pandemic and post pandemic of women leaving traditional corporate jobs and starting their own businesses, and she was wondering, what's your perspective on the pros and cons of a corporate career versus building a startup?
I think the corporate career it's more safe and you have more resources and it's more of if you think about from a revenue stream, it's reoccurring. If you look at starting on your own, you don't have IT support, which is terrible. You don't have those resources, and you're doing stuff on your own. But the nice thing is, you're doing stuff on your own, and you're determining the strategy. You're determining who you want to work with, what products that you want, and and I think Nina is right. There's definitely a movement. I see it with female founders, and a lot of the female founders have gone from corporate to doing their own thing, and some real badasses doing some really cool things. And I see it in my coaching circles. There are a lot of men and women that have left corporate America and are taking their corporate experience and putting that into their own startup or their own business. Um, so
That's super helpful. Super helpful. I wonder, could we talk a little bit more about that? I know you're involved in a number of things, but can we talk a little bit about your coaching? Kind of why, a little bit more about why you decided to focus on that, kind of what your practice entails, and maybe some things that are top of mind for you as you're coaching others.
sure, absolutely. So when I was at Expedia, I always led large teams and very focused on mentorship and sponsorship. And so when I was thinking about what's my next journey, it really is people related. And I really want to help support people and help them grow, personally and professionally, as well as help organizations grow. So that was really kind of the purpose is do something that helps make an impact in people's lives as well as drives revenue for companies. So that's been really fun. I do individual coaching as well as group coaching and leadership teams coaching. And what I found is it's really fascinating. I think I do a lot of work with more senior executives, and what I do is I help them basically lead more effectively and create cultures that are more engaged and more aligned. And why I think that work is important is, post COVID, we're seeing burnout, we're seeing talent walking out the door. I would call it actually a talent crisis. And we don't have employees that are as engaged as they once were. So that leadership level, I think, is critically important, where leaders need to be aligned themselves and then make sure that employees within the organization are aligned with the goals of the organization. Employees want to know how they fit into the goals of the organization. They want to feel valued. And so there's a real opportunity for that. And I found that my clients, when we're focusing on this, are really getting a lot of benefit out of it, as far as, you know employees feeling more connected, leadership teams jiving more, less turnover, and just overall more productivity. When employees are engaged, they're more productive.
So I imagine this really varies client to client, but if the objective is alignment, it's team cohesion, the business outcomes that we're working towards are employee retention, keeping them around, engaged, productive. For the people you're coaching, are there skills or capabilities uh, as specific as we can get here that you focus on that you notice are recurring themes that help people get to that place where they can lead an organization with alignment?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I'll talk about a few, but I've done a lot of research, men versus women, senior level, junior level. And there are a couple areas that, no matter if you're a man or a woman or what level you are, that people want help in. And that's personal branding. And I read an article yesterday in Forbes that personal branding is the number one thing that helps with confidence. So confidence is also something um, that I think women tend to have more confidence issues than men. Men definitely have confidence issues. They just don't talk about it as much. So personal branding, confidence, influencing and negotiating, making sure that we talked about the business case, making sure that you know how to influence the, stakeholders that are in the room that you're presenting to. And then another one is really overall executive presence. How does someone stand out in a room, and how does someone have kind of that name that people think about that lingers in the back of their head when they're not in the room? So those are kind of some of the areas that I do individual and group coaching on.
Okay, now I'm curious. How do you stand out in a room?
Well, you have to, that's really where personal branding comes in. You have to know what your personal brand is. You have to know how you're unique. I do a workshop called Unique Branding, and it's really defining what makes you different and what makes you that billboard that someone's going to stop and stare at. And what makes you stand out, where a leader is going to pick you for a high profile project over someone else.
It's so interesting because as a former CMO, you kind of, imagine you've worked on so many campaigns and so many elements of a campaign, right? The positioning, the language, what makes you different, all that kind of stuff. It's so interesting to hear it can translate to us individually.
It is interesting. And I think the other really interesting part is it's harder for people to advocate for themselves and create their own marketing brand than it is for them to do for someone else or a company. And that's part of the personal branding workshop that I give is, I make the people in the class write out what are their values, what are their accomplishments, and kind of a what I call a brag book. Write down your top 10 accomplishments and then have someone else look at it or go and show your boss. Because a lot of times someone else remembers things that you don't, or they would say it differently or highlight it differently. So I think that's an important thing.
I want to get your take on something because I was actually making a note here because if you think about, you mentioned confidence, you mentioned personal branding, you mentioned influence in negotiating. At first glance, those seem like disparate, I guess, capabilities. But is there some connection between each of these? And if so, is there some sequence that people should think about? Like, does confidence lead to branding and personal presence, or is it the other way around?
Uh, it's an interesting way to think about it. For me, it starts with personal branding, and because if you know what you're good at and what you stand for and what your brand statement is, that in itself helps with your confidence. And a lot of times when the self-doubt talk comes in, if you have your personal brand statement and you have your accomplishments, then you can look at that and it kind of sinks that self-doubt. Um, so I think it starts with personal branding, and I think influencing and negotiating are probably two areas that people don't invest enough time and energy in, both for themselves and for their company. The negotiating is such a critical thing, whether it's buying a car, whether it's trying to get a promotion, whether it's an actual negotiation with a client. There's a skill and process that goes with that, and my opinion is that people don't spend enough time or value on those areas.
So let's say someone's listening to this, they're bought in. They say, I want to take the next step in this journey, personal development. Two-part question: where can they follow you to learn more about your work, or find more about that? And are there any other resources you'd point them to take a next step on this journey?
The best place to find me is LinkedIn. I of course have a website, but I think for me, you learn a little bit more about my style and um, my coaching through LinkedIn. Um, and resources, there are a ton out there. I read HBR every day, Forbes every day. I read books. I read anything Brene Brown says or does. Um, what's important to the clients that I work with is what are the bite-sized elements that they can take in. And usually the best outcomes are if they focus a little bit every single day. So find what that is, whether it's your podcast, whether it's a news article, whether it's a chapter in a book, whatever is easiest and most consumable, because that's when people will stick with it, and then you'll see the improvement from there.